First of all, I'll give you some information about what a Wendigo is. Stories of Wendigos started in Canada and the US. In Algonquian folklore, the Wendigo, or Wendigo, also Wetiko, is a mythical man-eating creature or evil spirit that is native to the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and the Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada. The Wendigo may appear as a monster with some characteristics of a human, or as a spirit who has possessed a human and made them become monstrous. It is historically associated with murder, insatiable greed, and the cultural taboos against such behaviours. I have an uncle who really liked exploring forests and hiking in extreme environment conditions. One day he told me he was really curious about a forest that was famous at the time. All his internet friends were telling stories about weird creatures they call Wendigos and how these monsters love to eat human meat. So he packed some items he'd need and went to Canada to explore the forest by himself. When he'd finally arrived, it was nighttime and he was scared and excited at the same time. He told me that he was walking deeper and deeper into the forest. He was feeling more and more uncomfortable. At some point he felt a pain in his neck, like someone was hanging him from a tree. He looked up and what he saw makes him still cry to this day. He saw a human figure staring at him. The creature was on top of a really tall tree. Then he pointed his flashlight and froze. It was a tall creature that was at least 2 meters in height and thin, with sharp teeth and black eyes looking like deep dark holes. Blood was everywhere in some pieces of clothing that it was still wearing. It looked like a heavily decomposed dead person, my uncle told me. He immediately ran back to the parking place where he'd left his car. He was about 600 meters from his car, but it felt like he had run a marathon. At the middle of the trail he heard a scream, like an animal was screaming. He reached his car and immediately left the place. The next day he left the country. He is now a friar, and every day he prays to God and begs him to not allow anyone else experience what he had that night. Thanks for reading. Please be careful and stay away from such places, because sometimes there is a reason that people are afraid to visit them. I've never posted before and not quite sure if this is the right place, but here we go anyway. This is one of the scariest things to happen to me as a kid, and it has always stuck with me. It was about 10 years ago and I was 9 years old. I had just moved back to California with my family. We were to be living with my grandmother in a cramped 2-bed, 2-bath, and I was excited. My grandma was an older, pretty religious Filipino woman, a converted Hindu and faithful Catholic. I'm not sure if that's a contradiction because I don't know much about either religion, but our house had lots of shrines, candles, paintings of Jesus and Hindu gods, and this overall weird energy I could palpably feel as a kid. It's important to note that I now consider myself a very open person, someone who may unknowingly attract these sort of occurrences. This may not be important to the story, or maybe so, I'm not entirely sure. But as a child I would hear music and voices whispering to me, as well as smell strange things when triggered by certain words. At the time of this event, this was something I was used to and knew of about myself. Because of this, I had some interest in Wicca and the occult. Not as much as I would later have, because I was still a child, but enough to often sit on the floor of my aunt's dimly lit and cramped room and look at her books on witchcraft. I don't know when and why, but around that time I began to have super strange, frequent and almost encompassing thoughts of the devil and demons. Like it would always be running through my mind, and I would comfort myself by remembering to recite some of the Hail Mary my mother had taught me. My aunt's room had a really creepy, suffocating feel to it, but I'd always spend time alone up there, even though I felt as if there was something watching me. I could place the energy coming from in front of her closet. My aunt is mentally ill, and at the time was not on meds, so her room was filled with stuff, but especially the closet. It was always open about a couple of feet or so, with lots of her things kind of stuffed in and falling out, and it was always pitch black on that side of the room, especially in the closet from what I could see. I slept up there with her, and was so jumpy and afraid all the time that I couldn't even shower by myself. One night my aunt goes out and my mother, my little brother and I go to sleep on her bed. I remember I was so afraid, and I couldn't stop staring at this creepy green fairy thing that my aunt had hung from a string near her bed. It always seemed to sway, and I felt that when I looked in its eyes it was sentient or something. I was in between my mom and brother, but sleeping the opposite way from them at their feet, staring at the space near the closet. I went to sleep and in my dream woke up. I sat straight up and felt such dread and fear I'll never forget. In the dream I tapped my mum awake and she looked at me in surprise. She said, "Ayanna, you're bleeding." I then felt my nose and realised blood was dripping from it. Then my eyes, my ears and my mouth. I got super freaked out and said, "Mummy, I've been thinking about the devil a lot," and something along the lines of how I couldn't stop and was really scared. But by the time I was done talking, she'd actually laid back and gone back to sleep. Then in a moment of absolute horror, something was on top of me. It was dark and I couldn't see. But I remember thinking it was a little white man. It was sitting on my chest with its knees on my collarbones, growling, hissing, making terrifying noises while it literally, and I mean literally, choked the absolute hell out of me. I was trying to flail my arms about, but I couldn't move. It lasted so long I remember thinking, "Oh my God, when will this end?" And then as suddenly as that, I awoke for real. I was laying on my back, breathing heavily and feeling sore, in the exact same spot as the dream. Briefly I thought, "Oh no, is this real? Will it happen again?" So I lay in silence until I could muster the courage to turn and look at the closet. I felt absolutely horrified. The space was radiating the most intense, deep hate and evil I will never forget. It has stuck with me for so long. I could just feel something staring at me so intensely, and also the sense that it knew that I knew it was there, that we were looking at each other in that moment. I rubbed my mum's hip for comfort and laid back down, immediately starting on a Hail Mary. I did it again and again until I could fall back to sleep. For some reason, I also felt that whatever it was, left. I could sense it walking out of the room. When I woke up, I went to stand near the closet and the space felt kind of empty. Anyway, I grew up and forgot about this story. I used to tell it to friends for a scary laugh, but I've just finished my first year of college and moved back here for the summer, so it's been on my mind. This wasn't even the most frightening thing to happen in this house, so we'll see if any other future things happen. Hopefully not. My aunt and uncle lived right down our street. Almost daily I walked down our little road to play at their house with my 2 cousins. I was 8 and my cousins were 8 and 10. It was a modest 3-bedroom home. It had a garage and a washroom that were not attached to the rest of the home. They never used the garage or the washroom. They had installed a washer-dryer in the kitchen of the home instead. When they had moved in, they cleaned out the garage and put plastic bags over the windows. The garage door was always open, as was the door to the washroom. We played mostly in the backyard, but we did fool around in the garage at times. The floor was asphalt like the driveway. The washroom floor was concrete. The walls in the washroom were yellow, and about 7 feet off the floor there was a single white shelf above a window that had 3 gnomes on it. They were dusty and creepy. They had stretched smiles and thick eyebrows. They all were looking in different ways. We used to scare each other and talk about how they weren't facing the way that they were earlier in the day. I guess we scared ourselves pretty good, since we rarely went near the washroom. But there was a door on the far wall of the washroom, and of course we were curious. One day we summoned up enough courage to try and open the door. We took turns scaring each other as we went deeper and got closer to that back door. We poked and yelled at each other as we inched closer, but before we knew it, we stood before the door. One of my cousins told me to open it. I reached for it and put my hand on the knob. I was scared, but I felt like the gnomes were watching me. I fought hard not to look back and up to that shelf. I sensed that the gnomes were watching me more intensely than my cousins were, but I pushed through that feeling and turned the knob. I was hoping it was locked. It wasn't. I slowly opened the door. It led to a small storage pantry, not even a walk-in. We stayed there looking at the old wooden cobweb-covered shelves. Then we heard a loud groan. We all jumped and looked at each other. We started to run out and one of the gnomes was on the ground. The other two were looking toward the door. We ran out of the washroom and inside the house. We were told years later that the family that previously lived in the house lost their children to unknown circumstances. From what I was told, the parents left because of the memories of their children hurt them too much, but maybe they left because their children wouldn't leave the home or leave them alone. It is something that is burned into my memory. That home has since been torn down, but this memory is the first thing I think of when I see that lot. I've got a friend I've known for a while. I'll call him MC. We both in school, but he lives a lot closer to it than I do. Because of this, I would sometimes spend the night at his house if I stayed at school late because of a ball game or if I had to be at school early the following morning. I've only spent the night at his place maybe 5 or 6 times, but on a few of those occasions I've had weird things happen. Usually I have trouble sleeping over there. I'll often wake up several times during the night, but nothing more than that. One night was different. MC has the whole second floor to himself. He used to share it with his brother, but he had moved out. At the top of the stairs is a small hallway that branches off halfway to a small storage closet and leads to a door on the right at the end. Through the door to the right is a bathroom, and to the left is somewhat of a gaming room. He has the end of the room closet to the door filled with memorabilia and books and stuff. On the other end are a couple of TVs, a couple of consoles, a few chairs and a futon. At this far end is a door leading into the room MC sleeps in. For whatever reason, this one night I was over at his house and I was sleeping on the futon upstairs. I was dreaming and I kept dreaming that I was waking up. Each time I would wake up in the same room, but something would be different. One time I woke up and the room I was in had a lot of people in it standing or sitting in various chairs. I recognised MC's brother and the girl, who was MC's brother's girlfriend at the time, sitting in his lap. I either don't remember seeing someone else I knew, or I didn't recognise anyone else. Another time I woke up and the room was empty and silent. The awakening I remember the most was the longest. I remember walking to the bathroom, but it was completely different. The room was dimly lit. The walls were a dark reddish purple. I think there was a painting or two on the walls. There was a sink directly across from the door, and above it was a window. I could see nothing out of the window, but the leaves of a tree or a vine. Everything else was pitch black. The leaves were wet, and I also got the impression that it was raining outside. I vaguely remember cabinets hanging on the walls. To the left was a spiral staircase that led down into the darkness. I think I peeked down it, and it just led into a wall. I explored this little room, which I felt was part of either an observatory or a lighthouse, for some time before I woke up again. These awakenings went on for some time. Finally, I actually woke up. I thought I was still dreaming at first, but then I realised I felt too aware to still be asleep. But I couldn't move. The futon was pushed against one of the side walls, and I was laying with my feet laying toward the wall that was shared with MC's room. I was facing the open door that led to his room, which was in the middle of the wall. As I looked there, I could swear I saw a guy in a grey hoodie standing there staring at me. His arms were by his sides, and his head was tilted down with his hoodie up. For his face I could see nothing but a shadow. I thought at first it was just MC, but then I just knew it wasn't him. The guy was too tall or something. I stared at this guy for about a minute. Finally he just faded away and I was able to move again. I was kind of freaked out at first, obviously. I realised that it must have been sleep paralysis. Nevertheless, that experience combined with several awakenings was just unnerving. The last time I spent the night at MC's house was a few weeks ago. I was leaving on a trip and had to meet up at my school around 5 the next morning. MC and his family had left for a camping trip, but they were gracious enough to allow me to sleep at their house alone. Despite having to get up early, I stayed up past midnight thinking that I would catch up on sleep on the bus. I think I fell asleep on the couch in the downstairs living room around 1 in the morning. I woke up to the sound of a machine starting up. I thought at first it was the icebox in the refrigerator, but it sounded like it was coming from the opposite end of the house. Confused, I fell asleep. I woke up again some time later. I was trying to go back to sleep, but then I began to hear what sounded like breathing. It sounded like it was coming from around the front door, which was above my head because of how I was lying. The breathing consisted of deep inhales and drawn-out exhales. The period between the breaths was about a couple of seconds. The breathing wasn't harsh-sounding or loud. Eventually I fell asleep, all the while trying to rationalize what I was hearing. All of this can be explained, I guess. Obviously the awakenings and the hoodie man are just dreams. The machine could have been the refrigerator and I was just disorientated. And the breathing could have been my imagination or something rustling due to the ceiling fan blowing air around. Honestly, I was just bored and wanted to tell these stories about my friend MC's house, yet something still feels off about his house at night. This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theatre geeks, 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl, and they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So per the directions, we made a left off of the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly this was, stepped over the log and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like a good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as my imagination. And in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared, not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What would we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing. And I mean massive. It was a large open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us expected to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned and there was an old dilapidated house, several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone, tall, lanky, and pale, dancing among the trees. And by dancing I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging round it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm and whispered, "What the fuck is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy shit!" I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our cars, hopped in and were peeling away in closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we were all still friends, living in different states yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of, "The woods. That really happened, right?" It most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 a.m, and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. I work at a Sonic as a skating car hop. It's not a good job due to the sheer number of customers. Most of them are assholes and I rarely get tipped. But anyway, this one time I was delivering food to a customer. He was a white male, probably in his late 20s, and had brown hair and a generic coloured shirt. I don't know why I remember him so vividly since this happened about a month ago. I was handing him his food and it was late in the day, so at this point I was mostly just paying attention to the food, but for some reason after I gave him his first drink I felt uneasy. I looked back at the guy for some reason, fixated on him, and all I could feel was this indescribable, irrational feeling. I don't know how else to explain it other than that the man radiated this feeling of just evil. The man was perfectly normal. He didn't have a creepy smile on. He wasn't pissed off. He looked like a guy who had just finished work and wanted to go home. But I couldn't shake this feeling that he'd done something or was planning on doing something horrible. Apparently I sat there for a moment too long as he had already put his drink down and looked back at me waiting for his second drink. And when the man looked at me, I don't know why to this day, but I felt pure fear. I don't scare easy, mind you. Sure, a jump scare might make me jump, but only 2 things in this world actually scare me. 1, people with knives, and 2, big dogs. They're kind of irrational, but still. When this man looked at me in the eye, I was literally petrified. I slowly handed him his second drink, making sure to hold the very top so he would have to grab the bottom of the drink. And afterwards I managed to hand him his food and told him to have a great day, as I quickly tried to turn around and leave. But then I heard, "Hey!" in a very demanding tone. Legitimately scared, I turned around and noticed he was handing me $1. Not just any dollar though, a blue dollar. Now if that doesn't make any sense, I actually view blue bills to be really lucky. I actually kept 2 of them in my wallet at all times because I, for whatever reason, think they may bring good luck. So the fact that this man, who radiated nothing but evil, handed me a blue bill just added to the level of creepy. I swiftly took the bill and threw out a "thank you, have a good day," before quickly retreating back into the store. Once inside, I let my colleague take the next 2 orders out just so I could make sure that the guy had left by then. But ever since then, I've never seen the man again. Most of the customers that come to my Sonic are all regulars, since I live in a small town and I can usually recognise everyone's face. But that was the only time I've ever seen that man, and honestly I hope it stays that way. Anyway, that's my story. I know it's not as exciting as some others with nightmares being followed home and such, but I just couldn't shake this feeling that he wasn't what he seemed. Anyway, thanks for listening. P.S. If you're wondering, no, I did not keep that blue bill. I actually threw it away the moment I came inside the store. I don't know why, but I could just tell that was not going to bring me good luck.